There have been fans all year who said that not having a true number 2 receiver opposite of Terry McLaurin was going to be a problem. The Philadelphia Eagles seem to agree, and the way that they employed a defense to stop the Commanders' number 1 receiver means that there needs to be changes moving forward. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, David Harrison. I'm your buddy, your friend, your eyes on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, part of Sports Illustrated's group of sites. I'm also helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team, so you can find me there as well. And of course, you're going to find me here every Monday through Friday, right with you. Thank you for coming through for today's episode. Everydayers, you already know because I tell you every day, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I appreciate you coming through for today's episode as well. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available wherever you are. So please subscribe if you haven't already on YouTube or wherever you're checking out today's episode, where we are going to talk about Jayden Daniels and his tendencies versus what the Dallas Cowboys do the most. I wouldn't even say necessarily the best. We're going to talk about the Dallas offense behind Cooper Rush when he's in at quarterback over Dak Prescott, who, of course, will not be playing anymore this season for the Dallas Cowboys. And we're going to kick it all off by talking about why it is important now that the Washington Commanders get Terry McLaurin moving. And we're going to do all of that thanks to Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 ticket. Now, like I said in the opening, there have been fans all year said not having a true blue number 2 wide receiver opposite of Terry McLaurin. No shade to Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey, Olamide Zaccheaus, all those guys, but not having that kind of fully established number 2 receiver was going to eventually be a problem. Well, the Philadelphia Eagles seem to agree, and they employed a defense that was focused on basically just stopping Terry McLaurin and saying, you're not going to beat us with the rest of your targets, even tight end Zach Ertz, who ends up with a touchdown catch in last week's game. And that coverage is something that I think the Washington Commanders should expect to see even more moving forward. And the adjustment they failed to make on Thursday night is the adjustment they need to start making now. So Terry McLaurin right now ranks 20th in the National Football League among wide receivers in targets through 11 weeks. Now, some of those receivers have only played 10 games and still have more. Some of those receivers have played the exact same amount of games. But diving into what the Eagles did to really kind of isolate Terry McLaurin and keep him from being a major impact in last week's game brought up an old conversation that we had going back to training camp, going back to the preseason, where some national media members, some outside media members went back and they charted Terry McLaurin's preseason snaps and said, look, all of them are coming from the left split wide position. That's a problem because Cliff Kingsbury has a history of doing this to his number 1 receiver, where he basically just puts him in one spot, doesn't really mix it up, doesn't really give the defense anything other than that to cover. And that is going to lead to a capped off plateau for production for that number 1 receiver. DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona. The concern was that was going to happen here to Terry McLaurin. Now, through the first 8-9 weeks of the season, Terry McLaurin on pace to set career numbers, having a really great year, had a slow start to the season, first couple of games, all that stuff. But after that, really got accelerated, really got going with Jayden Daniels. Now, that production is kind of tapered off, and some of that was due to the Jayden Daniels injury. And of course, a lot of the conversation was there. So not a lot of light being shown on what exactly was going on with Terry McLaurin. So now that you have a situation where he's got 1 catch, 10 yards, and a big divisional loss in prime time, this is where that light gets turned on to Terry McLaurin. 76% of Terry McLaurin's routes have been run from the split wide left alignments this season. That means he's left side, outside the numbers, towards the sideline. Among the receivers in the NFL that are ahead of him, remember, Terry McLaurin ranks 20th in targets among NFL receivers this year. Of the 19 receivers that are ahead of him, so other number 1 receivers, some number 2 receivers, there's a couple of Seahawks getting more targets this year than Terry is alone. Nobody, not a single one of them has as heavy a slant and where they align for their route to run than Terry McLaurin. Here are the other highest. So remember, Terry McLaurin, 76% of his routes coming from split wide left. Here are the other highest among players that are getting as many targets as he is or more. DJ Moore is the next highest. Behind Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore has the next highest slant, heaviest slant to where he lines up for one's position. 59% of the time, DJ Moore is split wide left. That is the number 2 player behind Terry McLaurin. 76% to 59%. You're talking about a 17% difference in the way that these two players line up primarily. Cortland Sutton, Denver Broncos, 52% split wide left. George Pickens, 48%. Calvin Ridley, 44% split wide right. Garrett Wilson, also split wide left, 43%. DK Metcalf, 42% in 2 positions. 42% split wide left, 42% split wide right. So 84% of the time, DK Metcalf is split wide. It's just which side he's on. He's splitting that time 42% between each side of the field. Guys like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, none of those guys are hitting as heavy an alignment slant as Terry McLaurin is. Terry McLaurin's alignment slant is so overly situated to one side, one position, and it's not just Terry. Noah Brown, 69% of his alignments are coming split wide right. Again, going back to your most heavily used receivers in the NFL, DJ Moore, 59% of his snaps, and he's much more highly used than Noah Brown is, yet Noah Brown is lining up nearly 70% of the time in the exact same spot in the formation. Luke McCaffrey, 45% in the slot, which is more in line with those number 1 receiver types, 32% right slot. So 77% of the time Luke is in the slot. Big slot was what he was drafted as, right? De'Ami Brown's hitting 44%. Olamide Zaccheaus is hitting 42%. So even your receivers on the Washington Commanders roster that move around more than guys like Terry McLaurin are sticking in the same place about as much as you would a normal number 1 wide receiver. The difference is these guys are not number 1 wide receivers. So how do you get them accentuated even better? How do you emphasize what they do on the playing field more? You move them around. You got to find the matchups. You got to scout the matchups. You got to say, okay, I think we can win best with Olamide against this guy. Luke McCaffrey looks like he probably beat this guy. Terry McLaurin's best matchup is probably this guy. And we move them around to figure it out. If the defense is stifling us, we move them around to figure it out and get our best shot. That's what some of the best offenses do. You'll see those receivers come out first 6-7 snaps. They're in different positions every single time. They're motioning in, they're motioning out. They're trying to figure out which thing works. And then boom, we find the trick. We find the pattern. We say, okay, that's our best avenue of approach. Let's go attack it. The Washington Commanders are not doing that. Furthermore, not only is Terry McLaurin lining up in the same spot a massive amount of time, McLaurin is also running about a 4-3 outbreaking to in-breaking ratio. So about for every 7 reps he's running, 4 of them are outbreaking, 3 are in-breaking. That's not a bad split, right? 7, you can't really divide that cleanly in half. But of those outbreaking routes, of those 4 out of every 7 outbreaking routes, 49% of them, nearly half of those outbreaking routes are goes or hitch routes. So as a defender, you already know close to a third of the routes you're going to face against Terry McLaurin, about 33% of the routes you're going to face with Terry McLaurin overall are going to be go routes, and they're going to be hitch routes, aligned left side wide. That is a major, major dose of what Terry McLaurin is going to do against an opponent already figured out. And the majority of your in-breaking routes are slants. So if you keep a second level defender underneath and inside in that kind of short slant zone, your primary defender, your cornerback, maintains his outside leverage and rides him deep. And then there's a deep safety in the middle of the field. You have roughly 40% of everything that Washington asked Terry McLaurin to do covered. And add in posts, which the deep safety should be able to cover. Add in over routes, which again, the deep middle safety should be able to cover. Corner routes, which the outside leverage corner should have good position on. Out routes, again, the outside leverage corner has good position on. And screens, which are short and swarm to the ball type of plays for a defense. And now you're looking at about 67% of what Washington asked Terry McLaurin to do covered by simply putting triangle defense around him, which is exactly what the Philadelphia Eagles did on Thursday night. They used a combination of cornerback Quinyon Mitchell, and then it was DB Cooper DeJean or linebacker Zack Bond, and then it was safety Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, CJ Gardner-Johnson, or safety Reed Blankenship. One combination of those 3 players pretty much all night had triangle coverage on them. Quinyon Mitchell maintained that outside leverage on Terry. The safety kept the inside post route type of coverage on Terry, and then underneath the defender, whether it was a linebacker, whether it was Cooper DeJean, bailing into that slant formation or in that slant space, and then deeper to prevent the hitch. And it kept Jayden Daniels from targeting Terry McLaurin. Those are things that the Washington Commanders have to anticipate the Dallas Cowboys doing, the New Orleans Saints doing, the Atlanta Falcons, the Eagles, again, obviously. Those are things the Commanders have to anticipate. How do you anticipate it? You have to start moving Terry McLaurin around. Look, I don't want to have revisionist history here, and I don't want to be angry about something we weren't angry about before. If it's working, fantastic. But the key right now is for Cliff Kingsbury is to recognize the Philadelphia Eagles figured it out. And they showed the rest of the NFL on tape. Because if I can see it, believe me, they can see it and more. They figured it out. You have got to come back with a counter starting this week against the Dallas Cowboys because they look like a very susceptible opponent. What's going on with the Dallas Cowboys, especially with Cooper Rush at quarterback? That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Prize Picks, and with Prize Picks, you can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the game where you pick 2 to 6 player stat projections, whether or not those players are going to get more than that stat projection or less than that stat projection. And if you do get it right, you can win a whole lot of money. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So if you think Russell Wilson's going to throw for more than 177.5 yards against Cleveland Browns on Thursday night, and George Pickens will get more than 58.5 receiving yards, while Browns receiver Jerry Jeudy will get more than 46.5 receiving yards, and tight end David Njoku will get less than 44.5 receiving yards, you can win up to 8 times your money with that lineup alone. So download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by Z-Biotics, and pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Z-Biotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. It's this byproduct that is to blame for your rough next day. Well, pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks that byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. And then the second step is to drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. The third step, enjoy the next day. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on your day. If all of that sounds good to you, and why wouldn't it? Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use the promo code LockedOnNFL at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. The last time the Washington Commanders really dominated the Dallas Cowboys, it was partially because Dak Prescott wasn't in at quarterback. Well, Dak Prescott's not in at quarterback now, and the Washington Commanders are expected to dominate the Dallas Cowboys again. What does the Cowboys offense look like with Cooper Rush after 2 games? We're going to dive into that right now. If you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, sign up today to become a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. From there, you're going to be able to text me your thoughts, your questions, your analysis as well. And I'm going to be texting you my thoughts, my analysis. I actually sent my insiders last night a few notes from today's episode script, some of that data that I just shared about Terry McLaurin, shared it with the insiders today. Their reactions, pretty much what I expected them to be. But again, don't want to get into revisionist history. It was working before. It didn't work against Philly. Would have loved to see adjustments in game. We didn't, but now we need to see adjustments moving forward. That's just part of the conversation we were having. And of course, insider exclusive only Zoom conferences where we get together, talk ball, talk Commanders. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to become an insider today. So is there really a difference between the Dallas Cowboys offense when Cooper Rush is in at quarterback versus Dak Prescott? Obviously, the quarterbacks themselves are different. The level of play is different. The level of talent is different. But how different is it really with Cooper Rush in there? Well, Cooper Rush came in for Dak Prescott in week 9. The first game we really get to see a game plan designed around Cooper Rush is week 10 in a 34-6 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. And then again this past Monday night against the Houston Texans in a 34-10 loss. And even though it's a 34-10 loss, that Dallas Cowboys team really did look a little bit better than they did the week before. So right off the cuff, the Cowboys team averaged 21.4 points per game with Dak Prescott as the starting quarterback. They've averaged 8 per game with Cooper Rush. So a very significant drop off there. Again, getting better in the second week than they did the first week. So that's, a significant part of this, a very small sample size of evidence to talk about. Now, the Cowboys offense played better last week, like I said, than the week before. And it's certainly possible that they take another step forward this weekend. I saw a Cowboys reporter kind of joke, well, Cooper Rush added 300 yards in week 11 to his week 10 performance. So imagine what he's going to do in week 12. Obviously, that's not going to happen. That's very hyperbolic. But the fact does remain, the more Cooper gets reps, the more Cooper gets experience, the more these guys get experience around him, the better they could potentially be. So the Washington Commanders, certainly, we don't have any concern about it anyway. Washington Commanders certainly not going to sleep on the Dallas Cowboys, and neither should anybody who's kind of coming into this matchup. Third down conversions haven't gone above 33% in the past 2 weeks in a single game. Fourth down conversions are about 33% as well total. However, they were 0 for 4 against the Houston Texans on Monday night. 0 for 3 in the red zone with Cooper Rush, 0 for 2 in goal to go. So no touchdowns being scored in the red zone or goal to go. Truthfully, though, it's not like Dallas was really setting the world on fire offensively before Dak got injured. They scored 24 points only 3 times this season with Dak Prescott as the starting quarterback. Compare that to Washington, who scored 24 more points 6 times in 10 games with Jayden Daniels as a starting quarterback. So there's kind of a significant difference in that measurement there. So against Philly, we saw a pretty steep decline in play. But against Houston, this is for Dallas, for Houston, things were more in line with what they've been pretty much all season long. So that's what we should expect from them. But it's not just the production, it's also how they're getting it. Before the Dak Prescott injury, the Cowboys were using 11 personnel 71% of the time. Since the injury, they're using it about 90% of the time. So a whole lot more 11 personnel usage. Now, 11 personnel is the most popular personnel package in the NFL. 1 running back, 1 tight end. It's the most simplistic. It provides you the biggest value of protection. You can chip block with the tight end, leave a running back in a block if you need them, and have maximum amount of receivers on the field as well. So it's the maximum profitability between protection and weapons out in the formation. 73% shotgun usage is about the same. Before Dak's injury, not a lot of play action, not a lot of motion. But since Cooper Rush has come in, you've got more play action. You don't have more play action, rather. Sorry, you got more motion. And I think that, again, trying to simplify things for the other quarterback, give them a better read on what defenses are doing. Short drops are still pretty much the same. This offense is relying on short drop passes more than anything, or still a good amount of designed rollouts. They're going to try to get that quarterback out of the pocket as much as possible. Not a lot of screens before, not a lot of screens after. Most successful in 21 personnel. Now, that doesn't mean they use it as much. They only use it about 9% of the time, but still very successful there. And with Dak Prescott, they were finding light boxes against them. So six guys in the box or less. And then they're still facing light boxes with Cooper Rush. So again, teams are attacking him fairly similarly. Very significant increase is used in 11 personnel with Cooper Rush. Again, the more experience he has, the more comfortable he gets with the playbook as a starter, the more that could change up. But expect to see plenty of 11 personnel from the Dallas Cowboys this weekend. Heavy zone run team, regardless of the quarterback, and it really should be regardless of the quarterback, because the quarterback doesn't really dictate that too much. Commanders defense. So how does Commanders defense stack up against those Cowboys tendencies? Well, they face a good amount of zone run teams. They've surrendered 5 touchdowns against zone runs this year. Yards after contact versus zone runs aren't terrible, but they are 21st in the league. So not, all the way at the bottom, but certainly in the bottom half of the league. 19 total missed or broken tackles against zone, while forcing 2 fumbles and stuffing 15 zone runs this season. They're allowing 4 yards per attempt versus zone runs, 9th highest first down percentage against zone runs, and they have a top 12 stuff rate. So it's kind of a boom or bust scenario here for the Washington Commanders defense against zone runs. Of course, that's where guys like Jeremy Chin, Quan Martin, Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner are really going to kind of make their money against Dallas Cowboys offense. Cowboys are also dealing with more injuries than just Dak Prescott. Tight end Jake Ferguson is in concussion protocol. Typically, that means he's going to miss at least 1 week, especially coming off of a short week. Monday night, he suffers the concussion. Very, very hard to clear that by Sunday morning. However, we also saw Giants running back Tyrone Tracy Jr. clear concussion protocol in a rapid pace. So that is not necessarily a given that Jake Ferguson will not be active for this game. But Jerry Jones did say on the radio Tuesday, quote, "I'm a little concerned about Ferguson," end quote. So, take that for what it's worth. Offensive lineman Zack Martin, all-pro offensive lineman, definitely headlines the list of starting offensive linemen the Cowboys lost on Monday night. Martin's injury is an ankle injury. He was already banged up before that. Tyler Smith also has an ankle injury. Rookie tackle Tyler Guyton went down with a shoulder injury, really aggravated a shoulder injury he'd already been dealing with. So that's 3 offensive linemen lost on Monday night for the Cowboys. I don't know that Zack Martin is going to be able to play. Tyler Guyton certainly looked like he was in a lot of pain. So if they get 1 out of those 3 back, they'll probably be happy. So this Cowboys offensive line is going to be incredibly banged up coming into Sunday. Wide receiver CeeDee Lamb had previously been dealing with a back injury. Wasn't listed on the Cowboys Week 11 injury report, so seemed to have a clean bill of health. But with the way the season is going, wouldn't be surprised if it flared up, quote unquote, and maybe he can't go anymore. Although I think it might take a loss to Washington this weekend to get that ball rolling to where CeeDee Lamb maybe shuts it down for the rest of the season. So that's our look at the Dallas Cowboys offense. Certainly, I get the reasons for people being incredibly confident, predicting double-digit wins, all that stuff. But there's also signs the Dallas Cowboys offense is getting better with Cooper Rush. Again, 2 games to study, not a lot of tape, not a lot of tendencies, not a lot of history. But week 2, definitely better than week 1 against the Houston Texans versus against the Philadelphia Eagles. What about the Dallas Cowboys defense? We'll take a look at them coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity. You don't want to waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. So how can you spend it more wisely to improve yourself? You can study some history, some economics, the great works of literature, and the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. Did you study some of those things in school? Sure, you probably did. Maybe you didn't. But even if you did, it's probably a good time for you to get a refresher, because time and technology change a lot of things, but they do not change the basic fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. And our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses. Those courses include, among others, American foreign policy, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, the history of classical music, Pythagoras through Beethoven. So if any of that interests you, or you want to just check out the other 40 free courses, go to hillsdale.edu/locked-on to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked-on to register today. hillsdale.edu/locked-on. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, looking at the Dallas Cowboys. Started off today's conversation talking about Terry McLaurin's usage, where he's running his routes out of, and the need for Cliff Kingsbury to get that a little bit mixed up now that the Philadelphia Eagles have certainly shown the blueprint to how to stop it. Dove into the Dallas Cowboys offense. Now we're going to dive into the Dallas Cowboys defense, and we're going to pick up with the defense where we left off with the offense, and that's talking about injuries. Safety Marquise Bell suffered a shoulder injury against the Houston Texans. So he's going to be, his status is going to be in doubt this week. Cornerback Deron Bland has a foot injury that he's been dealing with since training camp. There's some rumors that he might be able to come back this week. So keep an eye on that. Linebacker Micah Parsons returned to action 2 weeks ago from his ankle injury, was able to again go fully this last week. So expect Micah Parsons to fully be on the field trying to harass Jayden Daniels. Defensive end Marshawn Nealand, who has a knee injury, has been on IR since October 9th. He's missed 6 weeks. If you include the bye week, 5 games, right? Was originally expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. Well, this last week was 6 weeks. So in theory, he could possibly be back this week as well for the Dallas Cowboys defense. And that Dallas Cowboys defense uses 4 down linemen 67% of the time. They also blitz 32% of the time. Highly aggressive defensive front. They close the middle of the field 52% of the time. 53% of the time, they're in single high coverage. 65% of the time, they're using 7 or 8 man boxes, the second most in 7 and most stacked boxes. So very, very aggressive defense from the Dallas Cowboys. Jayden Daniels against that type of a defense, 63.8% completion rate against 7, 8, and 9 man boxes, 84.3 catchable rate. Neither is all that great, to be quite honest with you, but both are certainly winnable. Passer rating of 105.1 against those types of looks, 12th best in the NFL. Again, against those heavily stacked boxes, specifically against 7, 8, or 9 man boxes with at least 4 rushers coming. Daniels has a 62.2% completion rate, 8.8 yards per attempt, is 7th best in the NFL. His touchdown percentage is 26th, though not a lot of touchdown production. Sack rate is 13th highest. Overall passer rating is a 100.7, thanks in large part to protecting the football. 14th in the NFL passer rating, 8th highest average throw depth, and that's where we turn kind of to the tape. So I turned on the tape and I made a very specific cut up list. Jayden Daniels against 4 down linemen or more, 4 rushers or more, and a 7-man box or greater, because that's what I expect to see from the Dallas Cowboys quite a bit. And looking at those reps, it really seemed to accelerate his internal clock based on the amount of respect he had against the pass rush. It was very, very interesting, actually, because against the Giants, they got Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari. He looked very calm, honestly. Like, he looked actually very calm, very confident in his team's ability to protect him against that pass rush. And it was just very clean, overall, just from his pocket presence. And you remember that game? That's kind of the game we came out. And we talked a lot about chip blocking and their ability to help him out and all that stuff. It really was a very well blocked game for the Washington Commanders offensive line, tight ends, and linemen and running backs helping out and blocking. But then against the Pittsburgh Steelers and against Philadelphia Eagles, he was very visibly sped up, which ironically will actually lead to a slower decision being made a lot of times because you're trying to process way too much information all at one time and getting in the way of yourself. And that's exactly what we saw in those games. We also saw him sped up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who brought a good amount of those looks. But then against the Cleveland Browns, we saw him look much more calm. And again, overall, that pass rush, not super effective. Myles Garrett certainly is, brings that alone. So it's going to be really interesting. Basically, you're going to be able to tell what Jayden Daniels thinks and what this offensive staff thinks of this Dallas Cowboys pass rush based on Jayden Daniels' own kind of internal processings. And so it was very interesting tape cut up to watch because it was very kind of clear and very consistent, against this opponent, very sped up, against this opponent, very calm. And it wasn't like a lot of, I kind of went into thinking like, okay, against this heavily stacked box with rushers coming and all this stuff, we're going to see similar behavior patterns, but we really didn't. So if you have that kind of difference in pattern and behavior against similar type looks, to me, what that tells you is you have a quarterback who is responding not on the look, not on the amount of aggression up front, but based on the confidence of his unit's ability to protect him from what that defense is going to try to do. If he has less ability and more respect for that pass rush, then he's going to be sped up. If he has more confidence in his pass protection than he does respect for that pass rush, then he's going to be a little bit more calm. Given what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys, you could certainly understand if he came out a little bit more on the calm side. But Micah Parsons, like I said, still a very, very dangerous man who can get home very, very quickly if he's not blocked up properly. So we'll have to see. But it was a very interesting tape study. So that's our look at the Dallas Cowboys defense, offense, and what the Philadelphia Eagles approach to defending Terry McLaurin means moving forward, or hopefully will mean moving forward for Cliff Kingsbury and the variance in his offense starting this week against those Dallas Cowboys. In the next episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going to have Locked On Cowboys coming through crossover Thursday. So in the meantime, if you got questions or comments, just send them directly to me. Text me by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. In the morning, it's Madman Tyler Rowland kicking off with a double shot of espresso. In the afternoon, it's the Barbershop Vibe with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.